I hadn't planned on starting my Sunday with an audition for a live-action episode of Family Invasion. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee, black, no sugar, because I had finally accepted I was too seasoned for syrupy optimism, when my doorbell decided to have a complete meltdown. It wasn't a polite ding-dong either. It was the kind of prolonged, frantic pressing you'd expect if someone were trying to summon the FBI. I almost ignored it, almost. But curiosity got the better of me, so I set my mug on the marble counter and walked to the door, trying to imagine what kind of emergency justified hammering on my door at 8 o'clock in the morning. When I pulled it open, I got my answer. There they were, my entire estranged family arranged neatly on my porch like they were posing for the world's most uncomfortable family portrait. My father, Philip, was eyeing my custom siding like he was about to declare it undeserved. My mother, Rosalind, stood stiffly behind him, clutching her worn purse to her chest like she expected me to confiscate it. Miranda, my younger sister, spoiled princess, professional victim, had one manicured hand resting on the handle of a massive suitcase. Her husband Trevor was already snapping photos with his phone, probably planning to post them with some family reunion caption later, as if this was some heartwarming visit born of love instead of desperation. And the kids. God, the kids. Emily and Ryan were bouncing in place with matching superhero backpacks and chocolate-stained faces. Emily's voice cut through the morning air like a fire alarm. "Mommy, is this our new house?" I felt my stomach clench. "Morning," I managed, my voice steady as steel. "Did you get lost on your way to literally anywhere else?" Miranda didn't even flinch. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my silk pajamas and designer slippers. "Nice outfit," she scoffed. "Look, we're exhausted. We've been driving all night. We need to come in." "Do you?" I asked, leaning against the custom door frame. Trevor stepped forward, his smile stretched so tight it looked agonizing. "Valeria, it's been too long. We've had circumstances," he said it like he was explaining why they'd accidentally burned down my garage. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." "Circumstances," I repeated. My pulse was steady, but I kept my tone ice cold. "Right. That's a creative word for it." Before I could get another word out, Miranda rolled her suitcase over the threshold like she just claimed my house as conquered territory. "We're moving in," she announced, like she was reading a shopping list. I blinked. "You're what?" The kids bolted past me into the living room, shrieking about how big the flat screen was. My father followed them, giving the place the same look he'd given me when I was 25 and chose business school over marriage, deep, condescending disappointment. My mother stepped around me delicately, like I might contaminate her. "We'll get settled in the guest wing," she said, not even bothering to look me in the eye. "It's just temporary. Miranda can explain everything." And that was when Miranda turned, set her suitcase down with theatrical flair, and fixed me with the most entitled expression I'd ever seen. "You don't even have a family to worry about," she said in that tone she used to use when she'd lecture me about being too career-focused. "It makes sense for us to be here. You have all this space. We'll take the house." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. They hadn't come to reconnect. They'd come to conquer. And standing there in my own doorway, I realized I wasn't surprised. Not really. I was just calculating. 3 years ago, I was the one driving across town with my life stuffed in the back seat. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. I'd been working at a consulting firm since I was 24, nothing prestigious, but I paid my bills, kept my head above water, and occasionally even had enough left over for a decent vacation. For a while, I thought that was success. Stability. My name on the lease, my groceries not coming from the clearance section. Then my boss decided that rejecting his advances meant I was not a team player and lacked commitment to growth. They called it downsizing. I called it what it was, retaliation wrapped in corporate speak. I packed up my cubicle, carried my box of awards to the parking garage, and sat behind the wheel with my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. It was the middle of January. My breath fogged up the windshield while my phone buzzed with overdue payment notifications. I held off calling my family as long as I could. Part of me knew how this would go, but some foolish hope wouldn't die. When I finally called my dad, he picked up on the third ring. No hello, just a flat, irritated what? I cleared my throat. Dad, I lost my job. There was workplace harassment and I had to leave. Silence. Women always make excuses, he finally said. His voice was as warm as a debt collector's voicemail. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. When I called my mother, she at least pretended to care. Oh, Valeria, that's unfortunate, she said, drawing out the last word like she was tasting something bitter. Well, thoughts and prayers, sweetheart. Maybe you should have just gotten married like Miranda. I didn't bother explaining that choosing career harassment over domestic dependence wasn't exactly a luxury. And Miranda? God, Miranda. She didn't even fake sympathy. At dinner that week, a dinner I should have skipped, but some masochistic impulse made me show up, she gestured at me across the table with her fork and said, "It's called being realistic about your limitations. Maybe you'll learn something this time." I should have walked out then. Instead, I sat there and listened while they all debated how I'd brought this on myself. Trevor suggested I try women's work, as if the 1950s were just waiting to hand me an apron. My father said I'd always been too ambitious for my own good. My mother compared me to Miranda, who, according to her, had made smart choices, which was rich, considering I'd watched them pay her rent, her credit cards, and once her legal fees after she hit a parked car while Instagram shopping. After dessert, because apparently nothing soothes career assassination like sugar-free cheesecake, Miranda cornered me in the hallway. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't look sorry. She just said, "We can't keep enabling your delusions." Then she walked away. That was the last real conversation I had with any of them. 2 weeks later, I got the eviction notice. I packed up my apartment alone. No one offered to help. No one called. No one checked in. I spent the next 6 months living in my car. If you've never tried to sleep in a Honda Civic in February, let me tell you, it teaches you things about yourself. Like how much you can endure. How low your standards can drop before you stop feeling ashamed. How quickly your body adapts to gym showers and gas station meals. Some nights I lay there staring at the fabric ceiling, thinking about that last dinner. About the way Miranda's mouth had twisted around the word delusions, like I was some hopeless dreamer she'd been forced to tolerate. Other nights, I just tried not to think at all. But even then, freezing, humiliated, exhausted, I promised myself something. If I ever made it out, they were never getting another chance to underestimate me. If you'd asked me back then how I pulled myself out, I wouldn't have had an answer. Some days it felt like my entire life was held together with sheer willpower, one small victory over another, hoping nobody would notice how close to breaking I really was. It started with a LinkedIn message. Elliot, an old colleague I'd mentored back when I still believed workplace equality was more than a poster in HR, reached out. "Hey Valeria," he wrote, "I heard what happened. I'm launching an investment firm. You interested in consulting part-time?" Interested? I stared at my phone until the screen went black. The next morning, I put on the least wrinkled blazer I owned, which still smelled faintly like car upholstery, and went in for the meeting. I didn't even have to pretend to be humble. I'd been humbled enough for 10 lifetimes. He offered me the contract on the spot. It wasn't glamorous. I analyzed market trends for a startup that sold overpriced wellness apps to desperate millennials who believed meditation would solve their student debt. But it was something. I worked days there. At night, I waitressed at a 24-hour diner where half the customers were too exhausted to remember basic manners, let alone mine. It wasn't unusual to finish a shift with my uniform smelling like burnt coffee and broken dreams. I'd stumble out the back door at 4 a.m., drive to the 24-hour gym, and shower before dawn so nobody could look at me and know I didn't have a home. Every morning I'd wake up in the driver's seat, my neck twisted at an impossible angle, my phone buzzing with collection calls and spam emails from loan companies I couldn't qualify for. But slowly, like watching ice melt, things started to shift. I saved enough to get out of the car. Just a tiny shared apartment above a laundromat with a roommate, Juliet, who only asked that I not use her shampoo and keep my panic attacks confined to my half of the living room. After the first night there, I lay flat on the futon, an actual futon, not a car seat, and sobbed until I felt embarrassed for it. 6 months later, Elliot pulled me into his office. "You've been killing yourself for scraps," he said. "I'm bringing you on full-time. Equity. Real money. You've earned it." Equity. I almost choked. I'd spent so long in survival mode, I'd forgotten stock options were even possible. I still waitressed on weekends, habit, mostly. It felt safer knowing I had backup income in case the universe decided to crush me again. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had momentum, like the future ahead wasn't just an endless struggle. A year in, I got promoted to senior consultant. My name went on business cards. They weren't fancy cards, just basic white with black text, but they were mine. Every time I handed one out, I'd pause like it might disappear if I stopped believing in it. During lunch breaks, I'd watch women in power suits walk past the building and think, you don't know how close I came to vanishing. But I didn't. I was still here. And if nothing else, that felt like vindication. It's funny how quickly survival mode can start to feel permanent. Even after I'd been in that apartment for over a year, part of me still tensed every time the phone rang, like I expected a voice to say, "Just kidding. Go back to your car." But life has a way of moving forward, whether you trust it or not. I got promoted again, partner this time. Elliot called it inevitable. I called it proof that not everyone was betting against me. With the new position came serious money. Enough that I started to let myself imagine something beyond just surviving. I opened a separate investment account. I called it the Future Fund, even though no one knew what future I was building but me. Month by month, I watched the numbers climb. I still waitressed occasional shifts, partly because the cash tips were instant, mostly because the version of me who lived in a Honda Civic didn't trust good fortune. The day I realized I had enough for a house, not a starter home, but a real house, I sat in my office and stared at the portfolio balance until my eyes watered. I'd done it. No cosigner. No family money. No begging anyone to believe in me. Just me. I toured 15 houses before I found the one. Custom built, 3 bedrooms, a home office, and a backyard big enough to host actual dinner parties. The realtor kept asking if I wanted to bring a husband or father for a second opinion. I smiled and said no every time. When we sat down to sign the papers, she passed me the deed with all the reverence of someone presenting a crown. "Congratulations," she said. "You're a homeowner." I don't think she understood that this was more than a purchase. This was the first thing I'd ever owned that no one could diminish. Or steal. The day I moved in, Elliot and Juliet showed up with champagne, gourmet takeout, and a bottle of aged whiskey. We sat in my spacious living room, toasting with crystal glasses. To the woman who rebuilt herself from nothing, Elliot said, raising his glass, and refused to let anyone break her. Juliet clinked hers against mine. "Here's to never having to sleep in a Honda Civic again." I laughed, even though my throat felt tight, because I knew right then that this house was more than walls and a roof. It was evidence. Evidence that I wasn't the failure my family expected me to become. That I didn't need their validation to succeed. That I didn't owe them a single thing. It started like a nightmare, the kind you think is over until you blink and realize you're still trapped inside it. I'd been in my home office, drinking coffee and enjoying the peaceful silence of a life I'd built through blood and determination. I was half listening to a podcast about women entrepreneurs when I heard it. Stomping in the hallway. Not a polite knock. Not hesitant footsteps. Just stomping, like someone was trying to demolish the sanctuary I'd built from nothing. When I walked out, my living room looked like the aftermath of some twisted home invasion. Emily was standing on my Italian leather sofa, my smart TV remote held aloft like she was about to proclaim herself queen. Ryan had wrapped my cashmere throw around his shoulders and was marching in circles, shouting, "This is ours now." My mother was in the kitchen with her head in my Sub-Zero refrigerator, rearranging my organic groceries like she owned the place. Trevor hovered near the floor-to-ceiling windows, phone in hand, taking videos from every angle. He gave me that fake, predatory grin that always made me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own success. Miranda came in last, dragging two enormous suitcases across my marble threshold as though this were some luxury resort she'd forgotten to book properly. She paused, surveyed my custom-designed space, then turned to me with the same smug expression she'd worn the day she told me to stop being delusional. "Nice setup," she said, casual as if she'd just discovered a vacation property she planned to claim later. "We'll be so much more comfortable here." I blinked. More comfortable than where? Trevor didn't miss a beat. "Oh, you didn't hear?" He pocketed his phone like he'd just finished documenting a foreclosure sale. "Miranda got fired. Your father's investments crashed. Our apartment got repossessed. We have absolutely nowhere else to go." He said it like he was explaining a minor inconvenience, not a complete hostile takeover. My father followed them in, carrying a designer duffel bag that probably cost more than my first month's rent ever had. He didn't look at me. He just dropped the bag by my custom staircase, adjusted his expensive watch, and declared, "We'll take the master suite. It's the most logical arrangement." Logical. That word ricocheted through my brain, unleashing memories I'd spent years trying to bury. Me sleeping in a Honda Civic behind a 24-hour gym, praying security wouldn't notice the condensation on the windows. Me counting loose change to buy ramen noodles. Me staring at my silent phone, waiting for any of them to care. I pressed my manicured hand against the custom door frame to steady myself. "I'm sorry, yo what?" Miranda looked up, expression so entitled it was almost breathtaking. "Valeria, be realistic. You don't even have a family to worry about. You have all this space just sitting here. It only makes sense." Makes sense. Like I'd stumbled into a hostile board meeting about my own property and somehow missed the hostile takeover memo. Trevor sighed, his tone shifting into calculated manipulation. "We've had an absolutely devastating year. You can't seriously expect us to live in some cheap motel." "Why not?" I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Plenty of people do it every single day." Emily bounced off my sofa and latched onto my arm. "Mommy says we're going to live in this big house forever." She squealed, like it was the most magical fairy tale she could imagine. My stomach clenched. My father was already unzipping his bag as if ownership had been transferred before they'd even rung my doorbell. Miranda stepped closer, lowering her voice into that condescending tone she'd always used to make me feel insignificant. "Valeria, you owe us. After everything this family sacrificed." I laughed. Sharp, bitter. More growl than amusement. "After everything you sacrificed for me?" Her face flushed red. "We supported you when you were younger." "Right," I said. "And when I desperately needed help, you told me to stop being delusional." Trevor crossed his arms defensively. "You're really going to hold ancient history over everyone's heads? It's not like we had any other choice back then." I looked around at the suitcases scattered across my polished floors, the children tracking mud on my Persian rugs, my mother reorganizing my gourmet pantry, and felt something crystalline and lethal settle inside me. They hadn't come to ask for help. They'd come to seize what I'd earned. And I wasn't that broken girl anymore. The thing no one tells you about betrayal is how crystalline it becomes once you stop trying to rationalize it. I watched them, my family, make themselves at home like it was the most natural thing in the world. My father settled into the designer chair he'd criticized as pretentious the last time he visited. Miranda unzipped a suitcase and started hanging clothes in my custom closet like she owned it. For a few seconds, I actually wondered if this was some elaborate prank. Like maybe there was a hidden camera and someone would emerge laughing at you. But no. This was reality. I took a measured breath, keeping my voice steady. "You can't stay here," I said. Miranda didn't even glance up from arranging her shoes. "Valeria, don't be ridiculous." Ridiculous. That was rich, coming from the woman who'd just arrived at my doorstep with an entire household. "You can't expect us to go to some seedy motel," Trevor chimed in, his voice syrupy and manipulative. "Think of the children." I almost snorted. I'd spent 6 months thinking of myself as worthless while I lived in a Honda Civic, and no one had so much as sent me a text. Now suddenly we were a united family unit. I raised my hand. "I'm serious. You need to leave. Tonight." My mother turned from the kitchen, clutching my imported coffee beans like she discovered buried treasure. "Valeria," she sighed, "you're being heartless. This is what family does. We support each other." I stared at her. "When exactly did you support me?" Silence. Miranda stood up, set her designer purse down, and crossed her arms. "You have no clue what we've endured," she said. "Dad lost his entire fortune. Trevor's freelancing dried up. You've got this massive house you barely occupy. It's just common sense." Common sense. Again. The phrase was starting to feel like a weapon they kept swinging at me. I pressed my palm against the wall, just to feel something solid, and said, "I'm going to ask you one final time. Leave." Miranda's jaw set defiantly. "No." And that was the moment I understood they weren't posturing. They genuinely believed they could just occupy my space, establish squatters' rights, and gradually erode my resistance. I didn't waste energy arguing anymore. I walked back to my home office, closed the door, and retrieved my phone. First, I called Alexandra. Her voice was sharp, she was reviewing legal briefs, but when I explained, she became laser-focused. "Stay composed," she said. "They're counting on you cracking. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Next, I called Elliot. He'd always been the strategic thinker. He answered immediately. "You need me to research property law?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "and maybe a reliable security company." Juliet answered before the first ring finished. "Want me to come over?" "Absolutely." By the time I set my phone down, my hands were trembling. Not with panic, exactly, more like the kind of focused energy I hadn't felt since the day I signed my business incorporation papers. The energy that comes when you realize you're about to establish a boundary that can never be crossed again. I returned to the living room. Everyone was still there, still acting like this was perfectly reasonable. I didn't bother addressing them again. I went directly to my bedroom, secured the door, and began collecting anything vital. My legal documents. My laptop. A few irreplaceable items I wasn't about to leave vulnerable. Then I verified the locks on every entrance and activated the voice recording app on my phone. If they were going to force a confrontation, I wasn't going to let them rewrite history afterward. While I prepared, my mind kept circling back to the last time I'd reached out for help. To Miranda's dismissive words, "We can't keep enabling your delusions." Fascinating how quickly the narrative shifts when they're the ones drowning. I sealed my bag, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited. Because this time, I wasn't the one who was going to break. When Alexandra arrived, she didn't bother with pleasantries. She let herself in with the spare key I'd given her 18 months ago, the one I'd never offered to anyone in my biological family. She walked directly to my bedroom, found me sitting there, bag in my lap, and nodded like she'd already assessed the situation. "You ready?" "Ready as I'll ever be." I followed her out. The living room looked like the aftermath of a hostile corporate takeover. My father was occupying my armchair, channel surfing like he was waiting for concierge service. My mother had brewed herself tea using my premium collection. Miranda and Trevor were positioned on the sofa, whispering strategies to each other. Their children were sprawled across my Persian rug, absorbed in cartoons. They all glanced up when I entered, but no one moved. Alexandra didn't speak. She simply positioned herself behind me, arms crossed, like legal counsel in a boardroom standoff. I took a controlled breath. My voice emerged steady, more composed than I'd anticipated. "I'm going to say this once," I said, "and then we're finished." Miranda opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. "No. You don't get to interrupt me. Not this time." She closed her mouth, and for the first time in my life, she actually looked uncertain. "When I lost my job, I contacted you. I looked at my father. I contacted all of you. And you told me to stop being delusional." I turned to Miranda. "You told me you couldn't keep enabling my delusions, like I was some hopeless charity case you'd been forced to tolerate." Trevor shifted awkwardly. My mother set down her cup, her mouth compressed into a disapproving line. "For 6 months, I lived in my car," I said. "I showered at a gym. I scraped together enough money to keep my phone active in case anyone, bothered to check on me. And none of you did." I paused, letting the silence extend until even the children stopped making noise. "But now you lose your housing, and suddenly I'm supposed to surrender everything I've built?" My voice wavered slightly, but I didn't care. "No. I refuse." My father's eyes hardened. "We are your family." "Are you?" I asked, and it came out quieter than I'd intended. Because family doesn't vanish when it's inconvenient. Family doesn't appear uninvited to seize what doesn't belong to them. Miranda stood up, her face flushing crimson. She looked at me with pure contempt and said the words that would seal her fate. "Valeria, be realistic. You don't even have a family to worry about anyway. The house should be ours." The room went dead silent. Even the children stopped their noise. I stared at her for a long moment, then walked calmly to my phone. Without saying another word, I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I kept my voice steady and clear. I have multiple people who have illegally entered my home and are refusing to leave. They're trespassing on my property. Miranda's face went white. "Valeria, what are you doing? We're family." I ignored her, continuing to speak to the dispatcher. "Yes, I've asked them to leave multiple times. They've refused and are attempting to take over my residence." Trevor jumped up. "You can't be serious. We're your family." My father stood as well, his face red with fury. "You're calling the police on your own family?" I finished giving my address to the dispatcher and hung up. Then I looked directly at Miranda. "You said I don't have a family anyway," I said calmly. "So this shouldn't be a problem." The next 15 minutes passed in stunned silence. Miranda kept trying to speak, but I simply walked to my front door and opened it wide, waiting. When the police arrived, I calmly explained the situation. The officers were professional and efficient. Within minutes, my entire family was being escorted off my property. As Miranda was being let out, she turned back to me with tears in her eyes. "We have nowhere to go." I looked at her and said the exact words she'd once said to me, "Figure it out." The door closed behind them, and for the first time in years, my house was truly mine. They left in a slow, humiliated procession. No one said goodbye. No one attempted to embrace me. Miranda dragged the suitcases out with the same wounded pride as a disgraced executive clearing out her corner office. My father paused in the doorway like he was about to deliver some crushing final verdict, but all he managed was a silent, furious stare. When the last of them stepped outside, I closed the door and engaged the deadbolt. The silence afterward felt enormous. It settled over me like expensive cashmere, substantial, but somehow luxurious. I stood there, hands still on the brushed steel handle, trying to feel regret. Trying to locate that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that always followed any confrontation with them. But it wasn't there. Instead, there was just profound relief. About an hour later, my phone started vibrating. First, a text from Miranda: "You'll regret this when you're old and alone. Remember, you chose to abandon your family." I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down on my granite counter. A voicemail followed. My mother's voice, quavering with manufactured heartbreak: "Valeria, please. We don't have anywhere to go. This isn't who you are. You're better than this." I deleted it without hearing the rest. Then came the calls from extended relatives, people who hadn't contacted me in years but suddenly felt entitled to lecture me. Aunt Margaret left me a message dripping with disapproval, her voice trembling like she'd personally been dispossessed: "Valeria, your parents sacrificed everything. You owe them gratitude." But then, 30 minutes later, came a different voicemail from Aunt Martha, who never tolerated anyone's manipulation. "All due respect to your mother," she drawled, "but I told her she was delusional. You did the right thing. You don't let people exploit you. Proud of you." I saved that one. Alexandra stayed with me the whole afternoon. She prepared gourmet sandwiches and opened a bottle of aged wine she'd brought over. We sat in my dining room, eating like it was any other day. She raised her glass. "To boundaries," she said. I clinked mine against hers. To finally being liberated. My phone vibrated again. More texts. More manipulation. More desperate attempts to claw their way back into my psyche. I didn't read them. I already knew exactly what they'd say: that I was cruel, that I'd betrayed them, that I'd regret this. But the truth was, I'd spent years regretting. Regretting I wasn't who they wanted. Regretting I couldn't sacrifice more. Regretting I ever believed their conditional acceptance was the same as love. And now? Now I was finished regretting. I walked through the house after Alexandra left, touching the surfaces, the architectural details, the custom elements I'd selected myself. The original artwork in the foyer. The chandelier I'd had installed last spring. The marble floor I accidentally chipped the day I moved in. This place was mine. I wasn't going to let them claim it. And I wasn't going to let them diminish the woman I'd become, either. The next morning, I woke up to a house that finally felt completely mine again. No abandoned luggage. No children destroying my living spaces. No voices scheming in hushed, desperate tones. Just the gentle hum of my appliances and the soft sound of my heels on hardwood when I walked to the kitchen. I made coffee, premium beans, strong, perfectly hot, exactly as bitter as I preferred it. While it brewed, I accessed the digital files I'd been postponing for months, all the administrative details I'd never updated because some part of me still believed my family might evolve. First, I revised my emergency contacts. I removed my father's information from every account, every application, and replaced it with Alexandra's. Then I added Elliot and Juliet to the backup positions. It felt minor but decisive, like deleting a bookmark you no longer needed to visit. Next, I donated the guest linens and toiletries they'd contaminated, even though they'd only been here one day. It felt ceremonial, purging the remnants of their entitlement. I didn't do it vindictively. I did it because my sanctuary needed to be cleansed again. Later that afternoon, I toured my property boundaries, just to remind myself how much I'd accomplished. The landscaping was still developing. The exterior needed some touch-ups. And the gate mechanism required adjustment. But it was mine. Every square inch. I thought about who I'd been 3 years ago, exhausted, terrified, desperate for any crumb of acceptance. The version of me who'd have surrendered everything without resistance, just for the illusion of belonging. That woman was extinct. And deservedly so. When I returned inside, I accessed the final voicemail Miranda had sent before I blocked her number. Her voice was tight with rage and something that sounded distinctly like panic. "You'll be devastated when you realize you have nobody left." I played it twice, then permanently deleted it. Because she was mistaken. I had exceptional people in my life. Just not them. That evening, I invited Elliot and Juliet over for dinner. Alexandra joined us too, carrying champagne and that expression she always wore when she was proud of me but didn't want to make me uncomfortable by verbalizing it. We dined in my formal dining room. No theatrical declarations. No unnecessary drama. Just conversation and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I defended my territory. At one point, Juliet raised her glass. To Valeria, she said, for not letting toxic people colonize her success. To Valeria, Alexandra echoed, touching glasses. I looked around the table at the individuals who had supported me when nobody else would, and felt something crystallize in my chest. Serenity. After they departed, I stood in my entryway for an extended time, watching my security lights illuminate the darkness. I thought about every moment I'd questioned whether I had value without their validation. I knew the answer now. I didn't need their permission to thrive. I didn't need their approval to be fulfilled. And I didn't need to leave my door unlocked for people who never once arrived bearing genuine affection. When I finally deactivated the lights, it felt like concluding a book I'd been trapped in too long. The girl they discarded needed them. The woman I became doesn't. And for the first time in my life, that felt like everything. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing and pressing the like button.